You and your 15-year-old kid are just freeloaders, the man who abandoned me said, drinking my wine inside the custom home I paid for. I used to believe blood meant loyalty. He thought he held all the cards and assumed my silence was submission. He did not know I had already seen the forged signatures, or that the daughter he called a parasite was about to dismantle his entire life, piece by stolen piece. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Aria Baker. I am 41 years old, and by every conventional measure, I have built a fortress of a life. As a senior director at Aerodyne Solutions, a premier tech logistics firm here in Denver, Colorado, I am used to managing chaos. I negotiate multi-million-dollar contracts, dissect supply chain failures, and read the hidden motives of corporate predators before they even open their mouths. I am a woman who thrives on control, precision, and the undeniable weight of facts. But nothing in my 2 decades of climbing the corporate ladder could have prepared me for the suffocating, visceral reality of the dinner I hosted on a cold Tuesday evening. The dining room of my Denver home was thick with the scent of roasted rosemary and the heavy, expensive tannins of an imported Cabernet. It was a beautiful spread, curated and paid for entirely by me. Yet the air in the room felt completely devoid of oxygen. Across the mahogany table sat Marcus, the man who contributed exactly half of my genetic makeup and absolutely nothing to my survival after abandoning me as a teenager. Beside him sat Eleanor, his new wife, whose fingers were draped in jewelry she could not afford. Next to her slouched Chloe, my spoiled half-sister, who spent the entire meal aggressively tapping on her phone screen, utterly detached from the tension radiating off the adults. And finally, there was my daughter, Maya. At 15 years old, Maya possessed a quiet strength and a sharp intuition that usually kept her safely insulated from this kind of toxicity. But tonight, she was caught in the crossfire. Marcus leaned back in the custom-upholstered chair I had picked out, swirling the wine I had purchased, in the crystal glass I owned. He looked at me with a mixture of disdain and unwarranted authority. Then, he delivered the words that would ultimately seal his fate. "You and your kid are just freeloaders," Marcus said. His voice was casual, carrying the absolute conviction of a man who believed his own delusions. The silence that followed was absolute. The profound, sickening irony of his statement hung in the air like a physical weight. For 6 months, Marcus, Eleanor, and Chloe had been living completely rent-free in my luxury cabin in Aspen. They had shown up at my door half a year ago, weeping about a catastrophic financial ruin that had wiped out their savings. Out of a misplaced sense of duty, the very weakness I had tried so hard to eradicate from my personality, I had handed them the keys to my mountain sanctuary. They were the ones sleeping on high-thread count sheets they did not buy. They were the ones burning through utilities I paid for. Yet here he was, sitting at my table, looking at me and my daughter as if we were the parasites draining his lifeblood. Normally, an insult like that would spark a firestorm. Years ago, I might have screamed. I might have listed every sacrifice, every dollar, every ounce of blood and sweat I poured into building my empire while he was busy ignoring my existence. But tonight, I experienced a sudden, terrifying moment of hyperclarity. The anger vanished, replaced by an icy, analytical detachment. I looked at the people sitting around my table. I noticed the faint, smug smile tugging at the corners of Eleanor's painted lips. I saw Chloe roll her eyes, entirely convinced of her father's fabricated martyrdom. They truly believed the narrative they had constructed. They believed that because Marcus was my father, everything I had built was an extension of his own greatness, and therefore rightfully his. I turned to my daughter. Maya had stopped chewing, her eyes wide and darting between Marcus and me. I would not allow her to absorb another second of this poison. "Maya, sweetheart," I said, my voice perfectly level and terrifyingly calm. "Why don't you take your plate upstairs? You have that history paper to finish, and I think we are done with family time for the evening." She did not argue. She recognized the steel in my tone. Maya quietly stood, took her plate, and walked out of the dining room. I listened to her footsteps ascend the stairs until the soft click of her bedroom door confirmed she was completely shielded from the fallout. Once it was just the four of us, Marcus scoffed, taking another large gulp of the Cabernet. He was waiting for the explosion. He was waiting for the tears, the desperate plea for his approval, the hysterical reaction that would validate his twisted sense of superiority. But I did not react. I did not shed a single tear, and I did not raise my voice. The reason for my composure was simple, and it was resting inside my locked home office desk drawer just 20 feet away. Just hours before this dinner, I had collected the mail. Tucked between catalogs and bills was a misdelivered letter addressed to Marcus, sent to my primary Denver residence. It was a final foreclosure warning. But the shock was not the threat of losing a property. The shock was the property listed on the notice. It was my house, the very house we were sitting in. According to the document, Marcus had somehow secured a massive, catastrophic loan against my home, a loan I never applied for, authorized, or even knew existed. The puzzle pieces had snapped together with sickening precision. He was not just an arrogant narcissist. He was a thief. He was actively destroying the foundation of my life while eating my food and calling me a freeloader. I stood up from the head of the table. I moved methodically behind Marcus, reaching over his shoulder to silently clear his half-eaten plate. I picked up Eleanor's dish, then Chloe's. The clinking of the porcelain was the only sound in the suffocating room. I stacked them together, completely ignoring the expectant, confused looks on their faces. I paused at the edge of the dining room, holding the dirty dishes. I turned back to look at the man who gave me life and the family he chose over me. I smiled. It was a chilling, practiced smile that did not reach my eyes, a smile I usually reserved for corporate rivals, right before I finalized their destruction. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I told them, my voice smooth as glass. "Get plenty of rest." I walked into the kitchen, the smile fading into a cold, hardened mask of pure intent. They had no idea. They thought they had won. But as I set the plates down, I knew with absolute certainty that this would be their last peaceful night on Earth. When I turned 18, the world did not offer me a safety net. It offered me an empty apartment, an impending eviction notice, and a father who eagerly packed his bags to start a brand new, shiny life with Eleanor. He did not leave a college fund. He did not leave a forwarding address or a single word of encouragement. He left a massive, echoing void that I had to fill with 80-hour work weeks, 3 overlapping minimum wage jobs, and an unrelenting drive to never depend on another human being again. My climb to the senior director position at the logistics firm was not a graceful ascent. It was paved with discarded social lives, missed holidays, and the kind of grinding, bone-deep stress that ages you prematurely. I built my foundation brick by brick. No one co-signed my first terrible car loan when the interest rate was extortionate. No one reviewed my early amateur business contracts. I was completely, utterly self-made, clawing my way out of the financial abandonment Marcus had condemned me to. Now, at 2 a.m, while my unwanted guests snored softly in the guest bedrooms down the hall, I sat bathed in the harsh blue light of my home office monitors. The dining room plates were washed. The house was dead quiet. I was operating purely on adrenaline and a cold, simmering rage that sharpened my focus to a razor edge. Acting as my own forensic investigator, I bypassed my usual sleep cycle and dove straight into the county clerk property records and deep-tier credit agency reports. I cross-referenced titles, deeds, and banking portals with the speed of a woman possessed. What I found hiding in the digital paperwork was not just a financial mistake or a desperate oversight from a man down on his luck. It was a calculated, horrifying execution. Marcus had not simply mismanaged his own portfolio and lost his money. He had committed identity theft on a catastrophic federal scale. Digging deeper into the encrypted files, I saw exactly how he had done it. Using my social security number, a string of 9 digits he only knew because he was listed on my birth certificate, he had orchestrated a massive shadow loan. He had forged my signature with terrifying accuracy, mimicking the sharp loops of my handwriting, to borrow $600,000 against the equity of my primary residence. I sat back in my chair, staring at the scanned digital copy of the forged promissory note. Suddenly, his disgusting comment at the dinner table made perfect, sickening sense. In Marcus's deeply warped, narcissistic mind, he had not stolen from his daughter. He genuinely believed that because he provided the biological material to create me, every ounce of my success, my wealth, and my property was a direct extension of his own domain. He had convinced himself, and likely his new wife, that my assets were legally and morally his to harvest. To him, my independence was just a temporary illusion he permitted until he needed to make a massive withdrawal. I was not a person to him. I was a bank account with a pulse. I did not cry. I did not panic. Panic is an emotion reserved for people who do not have a plan. Instead, I opened my secure corporate email client and drafted a highly confidential message to Vance Sterling. Vance was a former federal prosecutor turned heavy-hitting corporate litigator. He was the kind of lawyer who did not just win civil cases, he annihilated the opposition, seized their assets, and salted the earth behind them so nothing could ever grow back. I had kept him on retainer for severe corporate espionage matters, but tonight, his exact skill set was required for a domestic war. I requested an emergency, completely off-the-books meeting for first thing the following morning. I needed federal jurisdiction, and I needed absolute, airtight secrecy. As I hit send, confirming the meeting, my phone screen illuminated in the dark room with a push notification. It was an alert from a social media application. I had kept tabs on Chloe's public profile purely for security purposes, but what I saw now felt like a personalized, mocking taunt. She had posted a new video from my Aspen property. She was lounging on the imported Italian leather sofa I had waited 6 months to have shipped from Europe, holding a ceramic mug of my artisan coffee. "Living the dream up here in the mountains," her caption read. But honestly, the water pressure in this cabin is so cheap, and the wireless internet keeps dropping. Might need to find a better resort for the winter. I stared at the screen as the short video looped over and over again in the silent office. A quiet, burning resolve settled deep into my bones, extinguishing any lingering trace of familial guilt. They were not just taking my money and risking my home, they were actively mocking the very shelter I had mercifully provided them. I locked my phone, gently closed my laptop, and took a slow, deep breath. Let them sleep off the expensive wine they stole from me. The storm was already gathering, and they were completely oblivious to the hurricane about to make landfall. Vance Sterling did not waste a single hour. By the time I sat in his minimalist, glass-walled office the following morning, he had already deployed a forensic accountant to dissect the forged promissory note. The reality was far worse than a standard bank fraud. The accountant uncovered that Marcus did not borrow the $600,000 from a traditional financial institution. Traditional banks required stringent verification and collateral proof. Instead, he had gone to a syndicate of ruthless, unregulated private lenders operating in the murky gray areas of corporate finance. These were not men who sent polite reminder letters or negotiated extensions over the phone. They were financial predators, and according to the buried clauses in the contract Vance slid across the desk, the grace period for the massive balloon payment had officially expired 48 hours ago. Marcus was a cornered animal, and the walls were closing in on him fast. Sensing my sudden, icy distance after the dinner, Marcus realized his silent, compliant daughter was slipping from his grasp. Like any classic parasite sensing the host pulling away, he decided to go on the offensive. The chaos started on a Thursday morning. I was in the middle of a quarterly logistics review when my desk phone rang. It was the head of human resources at Aerodyne. Her voice was strained, tight with professional panic. She informed me that multiple anonymous emails had bypassed our spam filters and landed in the inboxes of every senior executive on the board. The emails claimed I was actively embezzling company funds to support a severe, spiraling drug habit. The accusations were wildly fabricated, but corporate protocol dictated they had to be investigated immediately. I was forced to hand over my work devices, suspend my access to the logistics mainframe, and submit to a humiliating, immediate drug test right there in the corporate clinic. It was a calculated, devastating strike meant to destabilize my primary source of power, my career. But Marcus and his wife were not just targeting my professional life. They were actively going after my blood. That same afternoon, while I was locked in a windowless conference room defending my integrity to human resources, another fire broke out. Eleanor slithered onto the campus of Maya's high school during a midday science fair. She cornered my 15-year-old daughter near the gymnasium exits. Eleanor put on a masterful performance of fake matronly concern, attempting to manipulate a teenager into questioning her own reality. "Your mother is very sick, Maya," Eleanor's voice hissed through the phone speaker later that evening. "She is losing her grip on reality, and we just want to make sure you have a stable home with us in the mountains when she finally collapses." Eleanor completely underestimated the girl I raised. Maya did not panic, and she certainly did not believe a single word coming out of that woman's mouth. Instead, my daughter had casually slipped her hand into her jacket pocket and pressed record on her phone. When Maya sat on our living room couch and played the audio for me, listening to that sickly sweet voice attempting to gaslight my child was like swallowing broken glass. I was furiously, violently angry. A dark rage clawed at my throat, but I forced it down. I needed absolute, unshakable control to navigate this nightmare. The next morning, I marched straight into the office of the Chief Executive Officer at Aerodyne. We had built the Western division of the company together from the ground up. He knew my character, and he completely trusted me. I laid everything on his desk. I showed him the forensic accounting report, the forged loan documents, and I played Maya's audio recording. I told him the anonymous emails were a domestic attack from an estranged family member, not a legitimate corporate whistleblower. He immediately authorized our internal cybersecurity team to investigate the network intrusion. It took our lead technician exactly 3 hours to trace the routing headers and IP addresses of the defamatory emails. They pinged off a specific internet service provider and landed right on the local network of my Aspen cabin. From there, the technician identified the exact device. It was Marcus's personal laptop. I had him cornered on wire fraud, identity theft, and corporate sabotage. I thought I finally held the winning hand. But a psychological thriller never lets the protagonist breathe, and the antagonists immediately shifted the goalposts again. On Friday evening, a process server knocked on my front door and handed me a thick stack of legal documents. I read the cover page and felt the blood drain from my face. Marcus had filed a frivolous, preemptive civil lawsuit against me in county court. Leveraging the very lies he sent to my human resources department, he formally petitioned the court for emergency power of attorney. He legally claimed my mental state was rapidly declining due to substance abuse and that I was an immediate danger to myself and my financial assets. His legal demand was the immediate liquidation of both the Denver house and the Aspen cabin, with the proceeds to be placed in a trust completely controlled by him. He was trying to legally erase my autonomy and steal the properties out from under me before the private lenders could break his legs. It was a breathtaking level of audacity. He was attempting to use the justice system as a weapon to cover up a felony. I sat in the dark living room, the absurd lawsuit resting on my lap, and the chaotic frustration finally crystallized into pure, cold strategic clarity. A standard eviction notice would never work. Evicting someone is a lengthy, messy civil process that takes months of hearings, during which Marcus could continue his campaign of destruction and manipulation. Fighting his power of attorney suit in civil court would drain my energy, damage my reputation further, and subject Maya to endless psychological evaluations from court-appointed therapists. I could not fight him in the mud. I had to elevate the battlefield. Civil court was a playground for liars who could stretch the truth for years, but federal court was a merciless meat grinder. I realized I needed to stop defending myself and start orchestrating. I needed to build a scenario so tempting, so perfectly aligned with his massive ego and his desperate need for cash, that Marcus would gladly walk blindly into a federal trap of my own making. The art of war dictates that when you are strong, you must appear weak. I sat alone in the center of my darkened living room, staring at the blank television screen, and meticulously practiced my performance. I needed to sound utterly broken, defeated, and desperate. I needed to feed Marcus the exact narrative he had been aggressively trying to force upon reality. I picked up my phone and dialed the number to the Aspen property. When Marcus answered, his voice dripped with that familiar, sickeningly smug superiority, expecting another argument. I did not yell. Instead, I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I let a very calculated tremor enter my voice. I told him I was completely overwhelmed by the constant attacks. I cried, producing genuine-sounding tears brought on by the sheer exhaustion of the past few weeks, and begged him for a truce. I told him the human resources investigation at work was effectively destroying my professional reputation, and that his aggressive power of attorney lawsuit was going to push me over the edge into a total psychological collapse. I pleaded with him to stop the bleeding. Then, I offered him the ultimate prize. I proposed a settlement. I told him that if he formally dropped the power of attorney petition, I would willingly sign over the entire deed to the mountain cabin. I suggested we could finalize the transfer during a formal, legally binding mediation session the following week in Denver. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, thick with his greedy calculation. He accepted the offer, masking his massive triumph with a thin veneer of paternal condescension, telling me I was finally making a rational choice for my health. Marcus hung up the phone completely drunk on his own hubris. He believed he had broken me. Through the security cameras I had installed on the exterior of the mountain property months ago, I watched the immediate aftermath unfold. He marched straight out onto the back deck, gloating loudly to Eleanor and Chloe. Their celebration was instantaneous, loud, and utterly nauseating. Operating under the absolute delusion that the multi-million-dollar asset was already legally theirs, they immediately began spending money they did not possess. Within 48 hours, luxury contractors were pulling into my driveway to provide estimates for an expanded outdoor kitchen and a heated infinity pool. Eleanor and Chloe began ordering incredibly expensive custom furniture and high-end renovations on entirely new lines of credit, using the assumed equity of the house as their phantom collateral. They were digging their own financial graves with imported golden shovels, and I did not interrupt them for a single second. I let them gorge themselves on false security. While they picked out imported Italian tiles, my general was maneuvering our heavy artillery into position. Vance Sterling had absolutely no intention of setting foot inside a county civil courthouse. Civil courts were slow, forgiving, and easily manipulated by skilled liars. Instead, Vance bypassed the local jurisdiction entirely. He packed his leather briefcase with the undeniable, concrete proof of multiple federal felonies. He took the forged loan documents with the fake signatures, the cybersecurity report, detailing the exact internet protocol, traces of the corporate sabotage from the Mountain House, and the crystal-clear audio recording of Eleanor harassing a minor. He walked those documents straight past the local police and directly into the regional field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He bypassed the front desk and went straight to the lead investigator of the white-collar crime division. The federal agents looked at the massive scale of the identity theft, the clear-cut wire fraud, and the extortion tactics. They immediately opened a criminal case. The trap was no longer a messy family civil dispute. It was a federal indictment waiting to drop like a guillotine. But I was not satisfied with merely sending Marcus to a federal penitentiary. I needed to completely neutralize the immediate threat to my home and dismantle his life piece by piece, exactly as he had tried to dismantle mine. The unregulated private lenders were still circling, expecting their massive balloon payment. I contacted my primary financial broker and quietly liquidated a significant portion of my corporate stock portfolio. I utilized those funds to set up a blind shell corporation, an anonymous limited liability company registered out of state to obscure my identity. Through Vance, my new company approached the shadowy syndicate holding the forged note. Those men did not care who paid them, as long as the debt was settled in full. I used my newly liquidated assets to buy out the exact $600,000 debt Marcus owed them. The transaction was clean, swift, and completely binding. In a matter of hours, the dangerous private lenders were entirely out of the picture. I had secretly purchased the forged note. I was no longer just the victim of his identity theft. Legally and financially, I had just become Marcus's primary, unforgiving creditor. I owned his debt. I owned him. Everything was perfectly aligned. The troops were positioned, the artillery was loaded, and the enemy was happily marching blindfolded into a meticulously designed minefield. The formal mediation session was scheduled for Monday morning in a high-end, glass-walled conference room in downtown Denver. On Sunday afternoon, Maya and I packed our bags. I told her we were taking a much-needed weekend spa trip to completely decompress from the stress of the past month. We loaded our luggage into my car, pulling out of the driveway and leaving the primary Denver house completely empty. I looked in the rearview mirror at the home I had bled to secure, the home Marcus had tried to steal out from under me. The house was quiet, secure, and waiting. The board was set. The satisfying, icy calm of preparation washed over me as we drove away, leaving the stage completely clear for the final, devastating showdown. The morning sun glared through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the 42nd floor conference room in downtown Denver. The entire city stretched out below us, a sprawling grid of power and consequence. I sat at one end of a massive, polished mahogany table, perfectly still, watching the heavy double doors. When they finally opened, Marcus led his new family into the room like a conquering king returning to his throne. He wore a bespoke charcoal wool suit that had clearly been rushed by a high-end tailor over the weekend. Eleanor clutched a brand-new, astronomically expensive designer handbag, the stiff leather practically screaming new money. Chloe trailed behind them, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and lazily tapping on her phone, thoroughly bored by the formalities of what they assumed was their impending massive payday. They sat down opposite me, their very posture oozing a toxic, unearned entitlement. They genuinely believed I was a broken woman, completely defeated by their relentless psychological warfare. Marcus did not even bother with a greeting. He simply reached into his jacket, pulled out the finalized transfer deed for my Aspen property, and pushed it condescendingly across the polished wood. The thick cardstock slid until it hit the edge of my legal pad. "Sign it," Marcus said, his voice dripping with paternal smugness. He leaned back and crossed his arms. "You finally learned your place. I told you, freeloaders always give up eventually. It is better this way for your mental health." I looked down at the expensive gold pen resting beside the document. I let the silence stretch out, counting the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I slowly lifted my chin, met his arrogant gaze, and leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair. Vance Sterling, sitting quietly to my right, did not smile. He possessed the icy demeanor of an executioner who had already sharpened his blade. Vance reached into his battered leather briefcase and pulled out a single thick packet of paper. It was not a counteroffer. It was a formal notice of default. He reached across the table and slammed it down directly on top of the fraudulent property deed. Marcus frowned, highly annoyed by the interruption. He picked up the packet, adjusting his reading glasses. His eyes lazily scanned the first paragraph. I watched closely as the arrogant flush completely drained from his cheeks, leaving a sickly pale gray behind. His hands began to tremble, slightly at first, then violently enough to rattle the paper. The document clearly stated that the massive $600,000 shadow loan he had taken out against my primary residence was officially in default. The private lenders were out of the picture. But the true paralyzing horror was the name of the new holding company demanding immediate total repayment. "What is this?" Marcus stammered, his voice suddenly thin and reedy. "This is a mistake." "There is no mistake," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet room like shattered glass. "The anonymous limited liability company listed as your primary creditor is entirely owned and operated by me. I liquidated my corporate stock and purchased your debt in full yesterday afternoon. You owe the $600,000 directly to me, Marcus, and I demand immediate repayment, which you cannot provide because you are completely, utterly broke." Eleanor gasped, her heavily manicured hand flying to her throat. She looked frantically from the document to her husband's ashen face. Before Marcus could even begin to process the absolute financial ruin crashing down on his head, the true climax arrived. Vance calmly raised his right hand and gestured toward the heavy glass doors of the conference room. The doors swung open simultaneously. 3 federal agents stepped into the room. They did not wear suits tailored for boardrooms. They wore dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation printed squarely across their backs. Their faces were carved from stone, entirely devoid of mercy. "Marcus Baker," the lead agent announced, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "Keep your hands perfectly still upon the table." Marcus froze, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Eleanor began to hyperventilate, taking short, jagged breaths that rattled in her chest. Chloe finally dropped her phone, the device clattering loudly onto the hardwood floor as she stared in sheer terror at the federal badges. I stood up. I placed my hands flat on the mahogany table and leaned forward, ensuring I commanded every square inch of the room. I laid out the evidence, piece by stolen piece, systematically dismantling the false reality he had lived in for 6 months. My voice was steady, merciless, and completely devoid of the daughterly affection he had ruthlessly exploited. "We have the original forged promissory note," I stated, staring directly into his panicked eyes. "We have the forensic handwriting analysis proving you faked my signature. We have the complete network logs and internet protocol addresses tracing the defamatory emails you sent to my corporate human resources department directly to your laptop. And we have the audio recording of your wife attempting to psychologically manipulate my 15-year-old daughter. You did not just make a poor financial decision, Marcus. You committed massive federal wire fraud, extreme identity theft, and corporate extortion." "No," Marcus whispered, shaking his head frantically as 2 agents flanked him. "Arya, please. We are family. You cannot do this." "Stand up," the agent commanded, grabbing Marcus by his expensive lapels and hauling him to his feet. They spun him around forcefully, the metallic, heavy click of the steel handcuffs echoing in the pristine conference room was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard in my entire life. As the cold metal locked around his wrists, the illusion completely shattered. Marcus snapped. The calculated manipulator vanished, replaced by a desperate, raging, cornered animal. "You ungrateful child!" Marcus screamed at the top of his lungs, thrashing against the federal agents. His bespoke suit twisted and tore at the shoulder seam. "I gave you life. You are nothing without me. You are a parasite." The agents yanked him backward, preparing to march him out of the boardroom and into the public hallway where my corporate peers could witness his absolute destruction. I walked slowly around the massive table until I was standing just inches from his flushed, sweating, contorted face. I looked directly into the eyes of the man who had abandoned me as a teenager, robbed me as an adult, and tried to destroy my sanity. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I leaned in and delivered the killing blow with absolute, terrifying calm. "I am not your child, Marcus," I said softly, ensuring every single syllable carved itself into his mind. "I am your landlord. I am your creditor. And right now, I am your prime witness." The federal justice system moves with a terrifying mechanical efficiency when presented with an airtight case. At his arraignment, his public defender tried to argue for house arrest, but the judge took one look at the sheer scale of the identity theft and the dangerous shadow syndicate Marcus had initially involved, and immediately denied him bail. He was deemed a severe flight risk and a danger to the community's financial security. Today, he sits in a cold, concrete cell, awaiting a sentencing hearing where federal prosecutors are confidently pushing for a mandatory minimum of 10 years in a maximum security penitentiary. There are no custom-tailored suits in federal prison, and there is certainly no imported wine. There is only the harsh, daily reality of a life entirely stripped of its stolen privileges. Without Marcus acting as their shield, Eleanor and Chloe's luxurious fantasy collapsed overnight. Because I was the sole legal owner of the Aspen property, and Vance had swiftly secured a permanent ironclad restraining order against all three of them, the local sheriff's department executed an immediate eviction. They were marched down my long gravel driveway by armed deputies, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs and a few hastily packed duffel bags. The true poetry of their downfall, however, was the financial crater they had enthusiastically dug for themselves. The massive lines of credit they had arrogantly opened for the custom furniture, the outdoor kitchen, and the infinity pool came due almost immediately. With no actual assets, no stable income, and no phantom equity to borrow against, they were forced into immediate, humiliating bankruptcy court. They traded a rent-free mansion for a lifetime of ruined credit, wage garnishments, and desperate minimum wage survival. As for my own foundation, I instructed Vance to formally dissolve the claim my anonymous shell company held on my primary residence. The title to my Denver home was cleared completely, wiping away the dark, fraudulent stain Marcus had tried to leave on my sanctuary. At Aerodyne Solutions, the dust settled swiftly and decidedly in my favor. Once the chief executive officer informed the board of directors how methodically, legally, and ruthlessly I had neutralized a highly sophisticated domestic attack, the human resources investigation was not just closed, it was completely expunged from my record. They realized that a woman who could dismantle a federal fraud syndicate over a weekend was exactly the kind of leadership they needed. 2 months later, they offered me the position of Vice President of Western Operations. I accepted it with a clear mind and a steady hand. Now, exactly 6 months after that suffocating dinner in Denver, the air is remarkably easy to breathe. It is a crisp, bright Saturday morning in Aspen. I am sitting on the expansive wooden deck of my mountain cabin, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, holding a steaming mug of artisan coffee. The sun is just cresting over the jagged peaks of the Rockies, casting a warm golden glow across the valley floor. There are no luxury contractors digging up the yard. There are no toxic whispers echoing down the hallways. There is only the gentle rustle of the pine trees, the distant call of a mountain bird, and the absolute, unshakable peace of a home that truly belongs to me. The heavy glass sliding door opens, and Maya steps out onto the deck. She is smiling, a bright, genuine expression that reaches all the way to her eyes. She holds a crisp, folded piece of paper in her hand. She walks over and hands it to me. I unfold it and read the official letterhead. It is an acceptance letter to the most prestigious summer engineering camp in the country. It is a rigorous program she worked tirelessly to get into, earning her spot entirely on her own merit, without a single shortcut. I got in, Maya says, her voice practically vibrating with pure joy. They gave me the top placement. I am so incredibly proud of you, I tell her, pulling her into a tight, warm embrace. We stand there together on the deck, sharing a laugh that echoes out across the silent mountains, completely unburdened by the ghosts of the past. Looking at my brilliant, resilient daughter, I realize a profound, grounding truth. Watching Marcus walk away in handcuffs was deeply satisfying. Knowing Eleanor and Chloe are facing the harsh, unforgiving reality of their own greed brings a certain sense of cosmic justice. But that was not my true revenge. My ultimate revenge is the unbreakable bond I share with the child I fiercely protected. My revenge is her bright, limitless future, free from the cycle of manipulation. My revenge is simply waking up every single day and living a beautiful, triumphant life, securely planted on a foundation built entirely on truth. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Haley Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.